Let's begin here, because too many believe that love is earned by constant effort. Many women pour themselves into pleasing, adjusting, and proving devotion, hoping this will secure a man's heart. Yet the paradox remains often: the harder you try, the faster the spark fades. What holds a man's memory is rarely the endless giving. It is the quiet mystery he cannot place. Love does not root itself in performance, but in presence. And presence is not created by striving. It arises when a woman lives in her truth without apology. Before I continue, let me know where you're listening from in the comments. And if reflections like this resonate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Most of us were raised to think that love survives through constant maintenance, like a fire that must be fed every moment. But Jung observed something deeper. He said that real connection is born in the unconscious, not in routine or control. A man does not fall in love because you anticipate every need. He falls when he meets something in you that mirrors what he has not yet faced in himself. That meeting does not happen through strategy. It happens through essence. Notice the contrast. On the surface, devotion and attention may look like the path to intimacy, but beneath the surface, the soul hungers for authenticity. When a woman represses her true self to be accepted, her energy flattens. The mystery that drew him in begins to dissolve. Yet when she inhabits herself fully, something wordless takes place. He senses an echo, a reflection of his own unspoken depths. Jung called this archetypal projection. It is the moment when another person becomes more than flesh and bone. They become symbol. Without trying, she embodies qualities he has long avoided within himself. And that awakens not just attraction, but a deeper pull, sometimes unsettling, sometimes unforgettable. Think of it this way. Devotion may make you admired, but authenticity makes you remembered. He can forget gestures. He cannot forget the mirror that showed him a hidden part of his soul. And that is where the story of love loss and transformation begins. In this first reflection, we are setting the stage. Love that endures is not built from endless striving. It is born when the mask drops, when the persona softens, and when presence itself becomes the message. That is the beginning of individuation, the place where true connection can take root. In every bond, there comes a moment when the surface harmony begins to crack. It may not be loud. It may not even be visible at first. Yet deep within, something shifts. What once felt natural begins to feel strained. Where there was flow, there is now effort. Where there was mystery, there is now predictability. This is the first fracture, the subtle but undeniable loss of balance that sets the stage for transformation. Many women believe that if they simply give more, adapt more, or adjust their lives to meet another's needs, they can prevent this fracture. The logic seems sound. If care and attention sparked closeness, then doubling that effort should deepen it. Yet paradoxically, the opposite often happens. The harder she tries to secure his heart, the further it drifts. Not because love cannot survive effort, but because effort without authenticity begins to erode the very energy that first ignited attraction. Carl Jung warned that when we repress our true essence to fit another's image, we sever the current between soul and world. The woman who once shone with calm self-possession starts to wear a mask. She may not notice it at first. She thinks she is only being generous, flexible, accommodating. Yet beneath the surface, her unconscious feels the cost. What once was alive in her begins to dim, and he, sensing without understanding, begins to pull away. Think of the contrast. In the early days, her presence carried a quiet certainty. She did not seek to impress, yet he was impressed. She did not strive for attention, yet he was captivated. That energy was not a performance, but a state of being. Now, when she shifts into pleasing, the resonance fades. He cannot name why, but something essential feels missing. The paradox is that she has not given less, she has given more, but it is no longer herself she offers. It is an edited version shaped by fear of loss. This is why many women, after such a shift, feel both exhausted and unseen. They are pouring out more energy than ever, yet feel invisible. The reason is not cruelty or lack of gratitude. It is the loss of essence. When authenticity is traded for acceptance, the invisible current of attraction weakens. He senses not her wholeness, but her effort. And effort without mystery cannot sustain the same spark. Jung called this the danger of living only through the persona, the mask we show to the world. The persona is useful, even necessary for social harmony. Yet when we live entirely through it, the deeper self retreats into shadow. She becomes the caretaker, the pleaser, the one who bends. He becomes the dependent or the controller, sometimes without meaning to. Both are trapped in roles. Neither sees the other as they truly are. The fracture widens here. The woman begins to wonder why she is not enough. She questions whether she has failed to love correctly, whether she should sacrifice more. The man begins to feel restless, pulled by an unease he cannot explain. He may seek distraction or even distance. Often, he confuses his discomfort with her, when in truth, he is unsettled by the loss of resonance between them. This is the tragic irony. What once bound them together is still possible, but buried. Instead of being nourished by presence, the bond is weighed down by performance. Instead of mystery, there is management. Instead of a mirror, there is a mask. And the soul, which cannot live on masks, begins to protest in silence. Let us pause here. How many women listening have felt this shift, the moment when your giving seemed to push someone further away? It feels cruel, almost unjust. You give, and in return, you receive absence. Yet this is not a punishment. It is a signal. The unconscious is showing you that something vital is missing, the truth of your own essence. When a woman abandons herself to secure another, she creates the very conditions for distance. He may not leave physically, but emotionally, he withdraws. He may not understand why, but the energy that once awakened him is gone. Not because she stopped loving, but because she stopped being. Jung often said that what we deny in ourselves eventually appears as fate. When she denies her wholeness, the relationship begins to reflect that denial. The first fracture is not caused by betrayal or indifference. It is born of repression. She has repressed her truth in the hope of keeping connection, and that repression becomes the silent death of intimacy. Think of it as a house. In the beginning, every room is lit. He walks through and feels alive. Later, one by one, she turns off the lights not out of malice, but out of fear. She worries that her true colors are too much, too strange, too demanding. So she hides them. And when he looks around, the house feels dimmer. He does not know she turned off the lamps to please him. He only feels the growing shadow, and he misses the light, though he cannot name what has changed. This is the hidden cost of pleasing. In seeking to secure love, she sacrifices the very qualities that awakened it. In offering more, she gives less, not less effort, but less essence. And essence is what the soul remembers. The fracture grows sharper when fear replaces clarity. Fear whispers that without constant attention, he will leave. Fear urges her to be softer, quieter, easier, less demanding. Yet clarity would tell a different story. Clarity would remind her that love is not sustained by submission, but by authenticity. The spark that remains unforgettable is not born from effort, but from presence. At this stage, many men also feel trapped. He may sense her devotion, yet it no longer awakens him. He may feel guilty, yet unable to stay engaged. This is why some men begin to pull back, not because they never cared, but because they cannot resonate with what no longer feels alive. The first fracture is a test, but also an invitation. It reveals the danger of living only through roles, through the persona, through fear. It shows how easily love can become a performance and how quickly performance drains the soul. But within this fracture lies the seed of change. For only when the mask cracks does the deeper self have a chance to speak. So pause and consider. Have you noticed when your giving turned into losing? When your effort became heavy instead of light? That was the sign. The unconscious was calling you back to yourself. The fracture may hurt, but it also points the way home. Jung taught that every shadow contains potential. In this case, the shadow is the hidden truth that your worth never depended on pleasing, and that love cannot be forced without cost. The persona may crack, but the self waits behind it. And when you return to that self, the spark can live again. This is why the first fracture matters. It is not simply the beginning of loss. It is the beginning of awakening. For in that moment, when effort fails, the soul whispers, there is another way. The path is not through striving, but through being. Not through performance, but through presence. And so the story moves forward. What begins as absence and confusion will, if faced with honesty, become the doorway to deeper truth. The fracture does not destroy. It exposes. It shows us the cost of masks and the power of essence. And though painful, it sets the stage for what must come next, the confrontation between shadow and persona, and the awakening that follows. The fracture that begins in silence soon grows into tension that neither side can escape. She feels unseen despite her giving. He feels restless despite her devotion. Both sense something missing, though neither can name it clearly. This is the moment when shadow and persona collide. The persona is the mask we create to move through the world. It allows us to adapt, to perform roles, to belong. But when a relationship becomes dominated by these masks, intimacy gives way to performance. She wears the mask of the pleaser, softening her voice, adjusting her needs, keeping peace at any cost. He wears the mask of the strong one, the controlled one, the man untouched by vulnerability. And behind both masks, shadows begin to stir. The shadow is the part of the psyche that holds what we repress, needs we deny, fears we avoid, truths we are unwilling to face. In her, the shadow whispers of resentment. It holds the anger of being overlooked, the grief of giving without reciprocity, the shame of abandoning herself. In him, the shadow stirs confusion and fear. It holds the dread of losing control, the unease of being truly seen, the terror of facing feelings he cannot master. Neither admits these truths aloud, yet the relationship begins to tremble under their weight. This is why arguments emerge over small things. A misplaced word, a delayed call, a forgotten detail suddenly carries far more weight than it should. The conscious mind thinks it is about the surface issue. The unconscious knows it is about something deeper. When shadow energy leaks through the mask, everything feels charged. What once was easy now becomes brittle. The soul demands recognition, even if the ego resists. Jung taught that what we do not make conscious appears outside as fate. In this stage, both partners project their hidden conflicts onto each other. She may accuse him of distance when in truth, she has distanced herself from her own essence. He may accuse her of being too much when in truth, he fears the intensity of his own feelings. Neither realizes that what they blame in the other is often what they cannot yet face within themselves. The mask of control can be very convincing. He believes he is steady, rational, unmoved. Yet beneath the mask, he is unsettled by the unfamiliar. She believes she is selfless, devoted, endlessly giving. Yet beneath the mask, she is exhausted, longing to be received as she is. When these masks meet, they collide. The pleaser cannot satisfy the one who fears depth, and the controlled cannot calm the one who longs for authenticity. Both shadows press harder against the fragile wall of persona. This is why many relationships feel like a cycle. The same arguments repeat the same silences, return the same wounds, reopen. The couple thinks they are trapped by circumstance, but in truth they are circling around their own shadows. Until those shadows are faced, the cycle will continue. For the woman, this is often the moment she senses the cost most clearly. She realizes that in striving to be everything she has become, nothing to herself. Her laughter feels rehearsed. Her presence feels thin. She watches him drift, not realizing he is drifting from the mask, not from her essence. The shadow within her longs to be acknowledged. It longs for her truth to be spoken, even if it disrupts the fragile peace. For the man, this is often the moment he feels the pull of contradiction. He wants her near, yet her nearness unsettles him. He desires her presence, yet fears the vulnerability it demands. His persona tells him to remain strong, composed, unshaken. But the shadow reminds him that love is not control. Love is surrender. And surrender threatens the identity he has built. It is here that projection becomes most intense. He may secretly admire her authenticity, but accuse her of being distant. She may secretly long for his vulnerability, but accuse him of being cold. The unconscious speaks in paradox, pushing both to see what they avoid. But the ego resists clinging tightly to the mask. Consider the symbol of a mirror. When two souls meet, each becomes a mirror to the other. If you are willing to look, you see not only the other's face but your own. If you refuse, you shatter the glass. This is what happens when shadow meets persona. The mirror grows uncomfortable. It reflects too much. And so one looks away. The other hides, and intimacy falters. Yet the discomfort itself is meaningful. It signals that something deeper is alive. Jung reminded us that the shadow is not only darkness, but also potential. The anger, the grief, the fear. These are not enemies. They are messengers. They show us where the mask has grown too tight. They reveal the parts of ourselves we must reclaim if we are to love authentically. For the woman, the lesson is that pleasing cannot replace presence. Her shadow insists that her worth is not measured by her ability to keep peace. It is measured by her capacity to stand in truth. For the man, the lesson is that control cannot replace connection. His shadow insists that strength is not the absence of vulnerability. It is the courage to feel without collapsing. Both must face what they fear if the relationship is to move beyond repetition. This stage is uncomfortable, even painful, but it is also necessary. Without confrontation, the shadow rules from the dark. With confrontation, it can become integrated, transformed into strength. The first fracture revealed the cost of masks. Now, the deeper work begins to meet the shadow, without running to admit what the persona has hidden, and to see in the other, not a threat, but a reflection. Every listener has lived some version of this. The moment you realized your giving had turned bitter. The moment you saw someone pull away, not because they lacked care, but because they could not face what your presence awakened. These moments are not failures. They are thresholds. They show us the limit of masks and the necessity of truth. The shadow will always demand recognition. If ignored, it sabotages. If faced, it guides. In relationships, this means that what feels like collapse can become the beginning of transformation. The mask may crack, but the self waits behind it, asking to be seen. And when you dare to look, when you face the anger, the fear, the grief, you discover not only what was hidden, but what was possible. This is the essence of individuation. To move from mask to mirror, to stop projecting what you cannot face, and instead integrate it, to step out of the cycle of repetition and into a path of wholeness. So in this part of the journey, the story deepens. The surface harmony is gone. The roles no longer work. What remains is tension, projection, and shadow. Yet within this tension lies the possibility of awakening. For only when the unconscious speaks through discomfort, through conflict, through longing, can the soul begin to move toward truth. And so we arrive at the threshold. The mask is cracking. The shadow is rising. The old ways no longer hold. From here, the path of awakening begins. Every shadow confrontation reaches a threshold, the moment when what has been denied can no longer be hidden. Masks grow heavy, projections collapse under their own weight, and the soul begins to whisper a truth the ego resists. This is the beginning of awakening. Awakening does not arrive with fanfare. It comes quietly, like the faint light before dawn. For the woman who has spent herself in pleasing the awakening begins as a realization: if I continue this way, I will disappear from myself. She feels the exhaustion of carrying a mask too long. She senses the ache of giving without being received. Something within her says no, even before she finds the courage to speak it aloud. For the man, awakening begins as discomfort that refuses to be silenced. He cannot control the energy she reflects. He cannot reduce her to a role, nor escape the emotions she stirs. What unsettles him most is not her presence, but what it awakens in him, the part of his soul he has avoided. Jung described this as meeting the anima, the inner feminine, which brings a man face to face with his own depth. Such encounters are rarely comfortable, but they are always transformative. In this stage, the mirror becomes central. The other no longer appears as a partner to manage or a role to fulfill, but as a mirror reflecting the hidden truth of the psyche. She is confronted with her shadow of self-betrayal. He is confronted with his shadow of control. Both must decide whether to keep projecting or to begin integrating. The awakening is not about the other person changing. It is about seeing the self more clearly than before. This is why many describe this stage as both painful and liberating. Painful because the illusions that once held the bond together begin to fall away. Liberating because what remains is real. The woman recognizes that her worth does not depend on being chosen. The man recognizes that love cannot be held by domination. Each begins in different ways to step back from the mask and into essence. Symbolically, this moment feels like standing before a doorway. Behind you lies the familiar cycle, the repeating arguments, the silent resentments, the endless giving and withholding. Ahead lies something unknown. The ego hesitates, clinging to what is predictable, but the soul urges forward. Jung said that the process of individuation begins when we turn toward what has been avoided. The awakening is the first step through that door. Notice how subtle the signs can be. A woman suddenly realizes that silence can speak louder than explanations. She sees that withholding her truth only deepens her loneliness, while voicing it, even gently, brings relief. A man suddenly realizes that his partner's independence does not diminish him. It unsettles him, because it shows him his own dependence on control. Yet if he faces it, he discovers strength not in dominance, but in vulnerability. These insights may arrive in small moments, but they alter the entire course of the relationship. Awakening also reveals the paradox of love. True connection is not found in merging, but in meeting. It is not about losing yourself to hold another, but about bringing your full self forward without fear. The woman who rediscovers her essence becomes magnetic again, not because she tries, but because she is. The man who admits his vulnerability becomes alive again, not because he performs, but because he feels. Together, they step out of roles and into reality. But awakening is not yet transformation. It is the awareness that transformation is possible. Imagine a candle lit in a dark room. The darkness does not vanish, but you can finally see it. You recognize the shapes, the shadows, the paths you had stumbled through blindly. The light does not remove the challenge. It makes the challenge conscious. That is what awakening does in the psyche. It is important to understand that awakening often begins with loss. When a woman chooses to honor her truth, rather than betray it, she may step back or even walk away. When a man chooses to face his shadow, he may feel stripped of the identity he once relied on. The ego feels this as defeat, yet the soul recognizes it as rebirth. Jung noted that the greatest transformations often begin in disorientation. We think we are breaking down when in fact we are breaking open. For those listening, reflect on a time when you realized you could no longer keep pretending. Maybe it was the moment you felt your giving turn hollow. Maybe it was when you saw that your silence was not peace, but self-erasure. That moment of clarity, however painful, was the seed of awakening. It called you back to yourself. And though the path forward was uncertain, you knew you could not return to the old pattern. That is the essence of this stage. The awakening is not about blaming the other. It is about reclaiming the self. She sees that her devotion must first belong to her own soul. He sees that his strength must include the courage to be moved. Together, if they choose, they can build something real. But even if they part, the awakening remains. Once you see your essence, you cannot unsee it. This is why Jung described individuation as both lonely and liberating. You stand at the threshold alone, yet you stand in truth. You may feel the loss of old illusions, but you gain the possibility of wholeness. The woman who remembers herself walks with a new calm. The man who meets his anima feels a new depth. Both are changed whether or not they remain together. So, the turning point arrives. The fracture has revealed the cost of masks. The shadow has pressed against the boundaries of the persona. Now, the awakening begins, showing that another way is possible. Not the path of pleasing or controlling, but the path of authenticity. Not the mask, but the mirror. This shift, though fragile, carries the promise of transformation. And yet awakening demands more than recognition. It calls for choice. Will she honor her essence, even if it costs her the relationship? Will he face his vulnerability, even if it shakes his identity? These are not easy decisions, but they are essential. For awakening without action becomes another illusion. The next stage will reveal whether this new awareness is integrated into life or whether the old patterns reclaim their hold. Here, the story stands at its most delicate point. The light has entered, but the shadow has not yet released its grip. The soul is awake, but the ego resists. Everything hangs in the balance. And from this threshold, the next step will decide the course of love loss and transformation. Awakening by itself is not enough. To see the truth without acting upon it is to fall back into the old cycle where recognition becomes regret. Transformation requires a choice, and every choice is also a boundary. For the woman, this choice often arrives as a moment of quiet resolve. She understands that to stay while betraying herself is to lose more than love, it is to lose her own soul. So she decides. Sometimes the decision is spoken aloud. Sometimes it is made in silence through the simple act of no longer bending. Whether dramatic or understated, it carries the same power, a return to authenticity. For the man, the choice takes a different form. He must decide whether to face what she awakens in him or retreat to the safety of control. To stay in the relationship means more than presence. It means surrendering the illusion of invulnerability. It means entering into the discomfort of feeling fully. His decision is whether to step into this unknown or remain in the familiar role that has kept him distant. The act of setting a boundary is not about punishment, it is about clarity. A woman who chooses not to chase, not to beg, not to sacrifice her dignity is not being cold. She is protecting her essence. And paradoxically, that act of protection becomes the very energy that leaves a lasting mark. Jung observed that when the unconscious encounters truth, it cannot forget it. A quiet boundary becomes unforgettable because it symbolizes something larger, the refusal to abandon the self. Think of the image of a door closing. At first, it may appear like an ending. Yet in Jungian terms, every door is also a threshold. The woman who closes the door on self-betrayal steps into a new chapter of individuation. The man who faces the door she closes must reckon with his own shadow. He may interpret it as rejection, but what unsettles him most is the mirror it forces him to confront. This is why many men, after such a boundary is drawn, feel haunted, not necessarily by the woman herself, but by the energy she represented. She becomes less a person than a symbol, the mirror of what he has not integrated. He may try to replace her presence with new relationships, with distractions, with achievements, but none of it carries the same weight. Because what he longs for is not her role in his life, but the part of himself she revealed. Boundaries are often misunderstood. People imagine them as walls that keep others away. In truth, they are gates that protect what is sacred. When a woman says, "I will not stay," where I must erase myself, she is not shutting out love. She is preserving the soil where real love can grow. Her refusal to betray her essence becomes a quiet act of teaching. Without lecture, without demand, she shows that wholeness is the foundation of true intimacy. And what of the man? If he chooses transformation, he too sets boundaries. He steps away from the mask of control. He refuses to let fear dictate his response to vulnerability. He chooses to stay present with his discomfort rather than run. This is not easy. It requires dismantling old defenses, releasing roles that once defined him. But in making this choice, he begins to integrate the anima within that inner feminine he once projected outward. Through this integration, he grows more whole. Transformation always carries consequence. Some relationships end when the woman walks away. Some deepen when both partners step into authenticity together. In both cases, the soul advances. The real tragedy is not the end of a bond. The real tragedy is the refusal to choose the decision, to linger in half-truths where nothing alive can grow. Boundaries are symbols of individuation. They signal the shift from living through the expectations of others to living from the center of the self. A woman who chooses herself without guilt embodies this individuation. A man who accepts his vulnerability without shame also embodies it. Together or apart, they move closer to wholeness. Jung often spoke of sacrifice as necessary for transformation. In this context, the sacrifice is not of love, but of illusion. The woman sacrifices the illusion that pleasing can secure real intimacy. The man sacrifices the illusion that control can protect him from feeling. What dies in this stage is the false self. What is born is the possibility of genuine connection. For listeners, reflect on the boundaries you have drawn in your life. Perhaps it was the day you decided to stop chasing approval. Perhaps it was the moment you walked away from a love that asked you to shrink. Those choices may have been painful, but they carried dignity. They were acts of individuation, where you placed the self above the mask. Consider the contrast. A woman who stays by betraying herself leaves quietly erased, her essence fading into shadow. A woman who chooses her truth leaves a lasting echo. He may not understand it fully, but he cannot forget it, because the unconscious never forgets the mirror that showed it its own reflection. That is the consequence of choice. That is the power of boundary. In symbolic terms, this stage is like the closing of a chapter in a sacred book. The words written cannot be erased. The lesson remains inscribed in the psyche guiding future encounters. Whether together or apart, both individuals are changed. She walks with more certainty. He carries the weight of what was revealed. The story continues, but never as before. Transformation is not loud. It rarely arrives with applause. More often, it appears in the quiet moments the door closed without anger, the silence that honors dignity, the refusal to trade peace for performance. These are the gestures that alter the soul. These are the moments that leave imprints far deeper than any words spoken in desperation. So, Part 5 brings us here to the heart of transformation. The woman has chosen. The man has faced the consequence. The boundary has been set, and with it, the path forward has shifted. The relationship may change form, but the individuals within it are forever altered. This is not an ending, but a turning point, the place where illusion dies and authenticity begins to breathe. And now, the story prepares for closure. After the fracture, the shadow, and the awakening, the choice has been made. What remains is integration, the weaving of these truths into daily life. In the final part, we will explore the resolution, the life lesson that lingers, and the way individuation turns loss into guidance, leaving a mark not on the ego, but on the soul. Every journey must reach its close, and this one arrives not with noise, but with a quiet clarity. The story has carried us from the first spark of attraction through fracture, shadow, awakening, and boundary. Now, the pieces settle. Now, the meaning becomes visible. What remains after all the masks, all the struggles, and all the losses is a truth as old as the soul itself. Real love cannot be begged for, nor controlled, nor purchased with endless sacrifice. It must arise from presence, and presence is born only when we live in our truth. The woman who remembers her essence becomes unforgettable, not because of performance, but because of authenticity. The man who faces what she reflected discovers that the deepest strength is not domination, but integration. Each has been changed whether or not their paths remain joined. Carl Jung often reminded us that the psyche seeks wholeness above all else. This journey has shown how the unconscious uses love not simply to bind two people together, but to awaken both to what they have denied within themselves. She was never only a partner, she was a mirror, and he was never only a pursuer. He was a soul confronted by its own depth. The closure here is not about winning or losing. It is not about who stayed or who left. It is about what was revealed and what has been integrated. The woman who chose herself carries forward a dignity that will shape every future bond. The man who wrestled with his anima carries forward a depth he can no longer ignore. Both have touched something real. Both have been marked by authenticity. What lingers is not the memory of effort, nor the details of conflict. What lingers is the moment of truth, the silence that carried dignity, the boundary that honored the soul, the awakening that revealed the mirror. These moments live on because they are archetypal. They reach beyond the personal and touch the timeless. The lesson is simple yet profound. When you betray yourself for the sake of love, the bond begins to die. When you honor yourself, even at the cost of loss, the bond leaves a mark that endures. Love that survives is never about possession. It is about presence. Love that transforms is never about filling a void. It is about standing whole and meeting another from that wholeness. So the arc completes itself. From the shadow of pleasing and control, through the discomfort of awakening into the clarity of boundary, and finally into the calm of integration. This is individuation in motion, the path of becoming who we truly are, even within relationship. And now, the invitation is offered to you who listen. Reflect on the moments when you set a boundary, when you chose dignity over desperation. Reflect on the times when your silence spoke more truth than any words. These were not losses. They were seeds. Seeds of transformation, both for you and for the ones who once stood across from you. Jung said that what we accept within ourselves becomes our light. The woman who accepts her own worth becomes luminous even in absence. The man who accepts his vulnerability becomes strong even in surrender. Together or apart, this light continues to guide. So let this be the final image, a mirror left standing in an empty room. No one touches it. No one speaks to it. Yet anyone who glances its way cannot forget the reflection it once showed. That is what it means to love with authenticity. You may pass through another's life for a season, but if you carried truth, you will remain as a compass in their memory. And as the story closes, the lesson becomes clear. The love that matters is not the one that demanded more and more until you disappeared. It is the love that reminded you of who you are. That love, whether it lasted days or years, left a trace not on your ego, but on your soul. So, walk forward with calm, Know that every true boundary, every act of self-respect, and every step into authenticity is not only a protection, but a gift. It is a gift to yourself, and it is a gift to others, even if they do not recognize it at the time. And now, I leave you with a question. Which part of this reflection spoke most deeply to you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. You may find that your words become a mirror for someone else, just as these stories have been a mirror for you.